Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Analysis. I am your host, Wasif Mahmood. The Metropolitan Police have been accused of effectively banning major pro-Palestinian marches outside of the BBC Broadcasting House headquarters. Organisers of regular demonstrations over the events in Gaza have expressed their frustration. They claim that the police have informed them that a planned Saturday protest could cause serious disturbance to Shabbat services at a nearby synagogue. Ben Jamal, the director of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, emphasised the importance of Saturday for these demonstrations. PSC said, "On Sunday, the transport situation is terrible, and so Saturday is the day we demonstrate. The police are effectively stopping us from staging pro-Palestinian protests outside the BBC." The situation highlights the challenges faced by the Metropolitan Police. Last month, the Met's Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, was criticised by the Chief Rabbi, Sir Ephraim Mervis, for not ensuring the safety of British Jews after allowing pro-Palestinian protests near synagogues. The Central Synagogue on Great Portland Street is just a few hundred yards from Broadcasting House. A Met spokesperson explained that officers had considered the cumulative effect of regular London marches on the Jewish community. We have this report from John Rees.
The Metropolitan Police look set to ban the next National Palestinian March in London, due on Saturday the 18th of January. The police previously agreed to a route from the BBC to Whitehall, and march organisers issued publicity on that basis 2 months ago. But after weeks of lobbying by Zionists, including the Chief Rabbi, the police have now broken that agreement and told organisers they will be banned from assembling at the BBC. The reason given by the Met is that the BBC is near a synagogue. They have said that going forward, no march will take place near a synagogue on a Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath. There has never been any trouble at any synagogue on any of the 22 national Palestinian marches, only a small minority of which have passed down roads in any way near a synagogue. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the Stop the War Coalition and 4 other organisations that call the national protest say that the police are using the excuse of offence to the Jewish community to shut down the marches. In a joint statement, the organisers said, "We firmly reject any attempt to suppress our right to campaign for an end to Israel's genocidal violence and decades-long violations of the rights of the Palestinian people. In the past few weeks, Israel has intensified its indiscriminate attacks, including against hospitals and civilians sheltering in so-called humanitarian safe zones. It is this and the ongoing complicity of the British government in these crimes that continues to bring people onto the streets in huge numbers. Our marches represent a diverse cross-section of the public, including the Palestinian community, many of whom are relatives of those killed by Israel. MPs and celebrities are due to issue a statement in defence of the right to protest. A spokesman from the Stop the War Coalition said, "We are marching, period. The Met are supposed to uphold our rights, not trample them in the mud."
A Met spokesperson has said the role of the police is to ensure that groups can protest lawfully, while also balancing the rights of those in the wider community to go about their lives without serious disruption. "We have carefully considered the likely impact the PSC's plans, including the views of local community and business representatives." The spokesperson added that a protest forming up close to a synagogue on a Saturday, the Jewish holy day, could cause serious disruption. They noted the cumulative impact of prolonged protests near synagogues, which had led to increased concerns among Jewish Londoners. The Met has stated they would consider using Public Order Act conditions if organisers attempt to proceed with their plans. The PSC has announced their intention to assemble outside the BBC's headquarters on January 18th for a march to Whitehall, protesting what they describe as the pro-Israel bias of the BBC coverage. PSC have said in a statement, "The BBC is a major institution, it is a publicly funded state broadcaster and is rightly accountable to the public. It is unacceptable for the police to misuse public order powers to shield the BBC from democratic scrutiny." The PSC claims that the planned march route would have passed the synagogue and that there has not been a single incident of any threat to a synagogue during the marches. Joining us to discuss this is Ben Jamal, Director of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, and Jonathan Rosenhead, Emeritus Professor at the London School of Economics. He is an Executive Committee member of Jewish Voice for Labour. He's also chair of the British Committee for the Universities of Palestine. Welcome, gentlemen.
All right. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yep, hear you fine.
Excellent. So, I suppose we've really got to start at the beginning, which is, where has this come from? It's not happened. We've not had this before. How all of a sudden are we getting into this situation? Ben.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably worth giving a little bit of context to both about how this arose and the dynamics of organising these protests and the relationship with the Metropolitan Police through that process. We've always taken the view as the coalition that organises the protests that we need to liaise with the Metropolitan Police. These marches have several 100,000 people often attending. The biggest one had over 1 million people attending. Each has had at least 100,000. So when you're marshalling that number of people through the streets of London, you need to make sure you can do so in an orderly fashion. Traffic is sorted in advance, etc., etc. So we always have a process where we propose to the police where we want to go and sort out the logistics. A march that incorporates at the beginning or at the end a protest at the BBC is something of political resonance. Since we began these marches October 2023, we've used the particular route between the BBC and the Whitehall twice. We wanted to go back there, partly to draw attention to the complicity of the BBC in what is going on in the genocide that Israel is perpetrating through the inadequacy and the biases of its reporting. And some of your viewers would have seen a report recently by Owen Jones, journalist, exposing the extent of the BBC bias. So around October, when we were in discussions around the march that we were going to hold in November, we said to the BBC we wanted on November the 30th, as I said to the Met Police, we wanted to incorporate a protest at the BBC for that march. They asked us not to do that because it was an extremely busy shopping day and we would go right through the commercial heart of London.
Did they ask you that and around the 30th of November when you did this, or how long after when you made that application did they put that in or make that process?
So we began those negotiations very early November. And what we said to the police, fine, we can choose an alternative route for this one, but we do want to go to the BBC then in January. And that was negotiated with the police. They said, yes, that's fine. And we agreed with them that we would announce the route of the march so that on November the 30th, at the previous march, we announced that on January the 18th, we are going to be going from the BBC to Whitehall. Shortly before Christmas, they began to raise concerns about this and were very, very specific. We have had representations from Jewish organisations. They included and named the Chief Rabbi, who says this will be disruptive to the Jewish community because there is a synagogue a few hundred metres north of the BBC, not on the route of the march. The march would not pass the synagogue. Now, it's a very pernicious argument. It is rooted in the idea and the narrative that has been pushed by pro-Israel organisations that these marches are inherently hostile to the Jewish community. They're unsafe spaces for the Jewish community. That ignores, as I'm sure Jonathan will pick up.
Yeah, I think I will want to pick that up with Jonathan.
There are thousands of Jewish people marching. What the police have now done is imposed an order that effectively says, and what they said to us in conversation, henceforward, you will not be allowed as the pro-Palestine movement to protest at the BBC on a Saturday. Because that will be disruptive to the Jewish community. The reason why it matters that they're blocking Saturdays is Saturday is a traditional day for protest for very, very good reasons. You can't hold a national march during the week, and transport for the thousands and thousands of people who travel from elsewhere in the country is extremely difficult on a Sunday. That's why Saturday has always been the traditional day for protest. So this is effectively a disbar on anybody who cares about Palestinian rights and wants to make the BBC a focus of protest for Palestinian rights, a ban on holding such protests at the BBC at any time on a Saturday.
Well, Ben, I'm going to come back to how we move forward with that, but I do want to bring in the Professor here as well, because Professor Jonathan, this issue of it being offensive to a Jewish person to have this march go past a synagogue, what's the truth in that?
Well, the march is not going past the synagogue. What they're talking about is that the fact that there's a march nearby might perhaps deter some people from going to the synagogue in case they should encounter the march on the way there or back. There's never been any problem with a march causing trouble at a synagogue. It's never disturbed a synagogue. There's simply no cases of that. So this is an invented problem. The march has been almost unbelievably peaceful. There are far less arrests in this march than you'd find probably on an average day in the same area. It's not an unruly march. It's not a hate march. We, as the Jewish bloc, walk very peaceably in it, hundreds and sometimes over 1,000 of us, and we are welcomed. We are Jewish, and there are no assaults.
Well, I would come back to that point as well, that in terms of the Chief Rabbi, he's put this particular issue forward. I mean, London itself is so compact. At some point you're going to pass a synagogue, at some point you're going to pass a mosque, at some point you're going to pass a church. So even throughout the entire route, there is going to be that kind of issue. Why has it come up 22 marches later that this is now an issue?
Well, the Chief Rabbi has, if you like, has skin in the game. He's a religious gentleman, but he was an Israeli settler. He was for many years living in the occupied territories. He's not an apolitical figure representing all of the Jews. He represents a certain interest which has dominated the official Jewish organizations, which are recognized by the media, and other organizations which also represent large numbers of Jews who do not agree and protest the genocide of the Palestinians are not generally consulted by media organizations, including the BBC, which is why we think it's appropriate to protest there.
Indeed. Ben, I want to bring you back on this particular point as well. I want to know, have the Met Police finally been worn down by the political wranglings and the political talk that has been going on from ever since when we heard the word hate march coming about from a certain Suella Braverman? Has it finally taken its toll? Is this what the police are now doing? Are they capitulating to political pressure?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is yes. We have, and in terms of your question as well, attached to that, which is why is this issue emerging now? I mean, it's not the first time the issue has emerged, but in terms of the intensity of the lobbying on this issue and the police response to it, there is a definitive shift. And I think the rationale of what's going on is this. From the very beginning of these marches, there were pro-Israel organizations and figures within the political establishment trying to find a reason to close them down. So your viewers will remember all of the issues leading up to the demonstration that took place on November the 11th. We've had a narrative that these are hate marches, they are disorderly, they're creating scenes of hostility, support for terrorism. Now, the police effectively have indicated they do not have the grounds to stop these marches happening because they've had to admit they are largely orderly and peaceful. There are very, very few arrests. So this is a new, if you like, opening up of the new line. So within the same framework of saying these are marches that are hostile to the Jewish community, there's now a focus on how can we use the fact that there may be synagogues in the vicinity of these marches, even if a march and virtually none of them go directly past a synagogue. How can we use the argument that these marches taking place in the vicinity of a synagogue creates a special form of harassment for the Jewish community? Now, in these conversations, the police have admitted to us, we've said, what is the evidence of a threat to a synagogue, of an incident, a single incident, a synagogue? The response they've given is there doesn't have to be any evidence. If people tell us that they feel harassed, then we have to treat it on that basis. What they also said to us directly in the conversation was the Jewish community, by which they mean organizations like the Board of Deputies, the Community Security Trust, and individuals like the Chief Rabbi, who, as Jonathan has said, have very clear, overt political positions in support of Israel. They have been making this point for ages, and what the police said is, we haven't been listening to them enough. We are now deciding that we need to listen to them. So it is straightforward. They are yielding to the political pressure that has been applied to them. And that is also coming from the political establishment. And I think my strong suspicion is the government are involved in this as well, in applying pressure on the police. So it's very, very pernicious. I want to say something else in relation to adding to what Jonathan said about the Chief Rabbi, because he has effectively tried to tie the entire Jewish community to support for Israel. This is a really pernicious and dangerous thing to do. He has described the IDF as our heroic soldiers. He made a speech in which he stated that what Israel was doing was noble and the most noble thing that any decent society could do. Those are extraordinary comments to describe actions that have landed a state on trial for genocide at the world's highest court, and with its leader effectively now evading prosecution for crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court.
Indeed. And Professor Jonathan, I suppose one of the things as well is the counterbalance, because you also, as well as representing the Jewish community, you also represent the students, Palestinian students as well. Have we got to a stage where the freedom of speech has been trumped by individual concerns, effectively? The ability
Yes,
to...
it's strange. There's a series of assertions by organisations which are not representative of all the Jews in the country, but which the media treat as if they were. And on the basis of this whisper of unsubstantiated evidence, are hard-won democratic rights and privileges, the right to assembly, the right to free speech, are being thrown away. I think it's actually a disgrace, and it's also particularly upsetting to Jews who are rightly critical of what Israel is doing, who feel they are being put in a box with people with whom we politically disagree, and we are being played as a counter, as people who are allegedly going to be frightened of marches. We are in the march in our hundreds, in our thousands, and this is an invented story for political purposes.
I would like to ask a question on that.
And the BBC is part of that, and we wish to be able to protest against their suppression. I'm in Jewish Voice for Labour. We hardly ever get approached by the BBC. We are also an organisation representing very many Jews, and we are not given airtime.
Jonathan, I would like to come back to you on one point in terms of how this affects the Jewish community overall, because clearly we've heard on these marches come out as not in my name. And so clearly the Chief Rabbi is doing something not in your name. But by the same token, we also see this groundswell of support from young Jewish students, individuals who've come to these particular marches. How much of a schism is this, and how much of a problem could this cause within the Jewish community if it continues with the way in which the rabbi has put this forward?
The position there is not as hopeful as I would like it to be. In the United States, very large numbers of young Jews are protesting with their bodies, with their voices, against what Israel is doing and what their government is doing to support it. Over here, there isn't as much diversity in the public expression. It's very hard. We have very many fewer Jews. We have a much smaller country. It's much more tied down by the, if you like, the hierarchy, the establishment in the Jewish organization. Mm-hmm. It's harder for Jews who are outside to get their voices heard. So I would like it to be true, what you're saying. As yet, the signs are small that we are being able to get our voices heard.
Indeed. Ben, I'd like to come back to you. On the 18th, I mean, we have this hashtag that's going around about We Will March. What happens on the 18th today? What will happen? Will this take place?
Well, look, first of all, we are going to be protesting and marching in London on the 18th. That's our intention. And we intend to hold what we've held on now 24 occasions, an orderly march, but attended by hundreds of thousands of people who are protesting. And the other thing it's worth emphasizing, because part of this is an attempt to change the conversation away from the reason why people are marching. And we're marching because the genocide continues. It not only continues, it's being intensified. You know, over the Christmas period, when many people in the UK were celebrating Christmas, in 4 days, Israel killed over 200 Palestinians. During that period of time, a stat was revealed that got very little attention, which is that the biggest age range of Palestinians being killed in Gaza are Palestinians aged 5 to 9. That's why people are still demonstrating. They are disgusted by the barbarism they are seeing being enacted towards the Palestinian people and our government's ongoing complicity. So we are calling, and use this opportunity now to call people to join us on the streets of London on November the 18th. We are calling on the Metropolitan Police to reverse the conditions that they've imposed so that we can protest at the BBC. And we will obviously indicate next week, as we see the situation evolve, exactly what the plans will be for the 18th. Today, we have had about 150 members of parliament, cultural figures, civil society organisations, trade union leaders put out their own statement calling on the Metropolitan Police to back down, both to preserve the rights for people to show solidarity with the Palestinian people, but to preserve the broader right to protest in this country, including outside the offices of the state broadcaster.
I would like to ask a question, two questions actually, but the first one is how the environment has changed between now and the last March. We've seen the emboldening of the far right, people like Elon Musk putting things out. Does that create a more problematic march in terms of instigators and people that would come in to otherwise try and disrupt the march? Is there more of an issue and a problem there that we need to consider now at this new march?
Well, sorry, is that for Ben or for me?
That's for you, Ben.
Well, I'll answer. Jonathan may want to add because he, as somebody marching, would have experienced this as well. Look, that has been a feature. We have had far-right and pro-Israel activists trying to disrupt the marches through various tactics. There are regular counter-demonstrations. There are people who try to insert themselves into the march to try to provoke those marching. We've had incidents where people marching past the pro-Israel counter-demonstrators, particularly women, have been subjected to Islamophobic, misogynistic comments. One of our issues with the police is what they are doing to make sure that people are able to proceed and march safely and clearly. So that has been a feature that we've had to navigate and manage throughout these marches. But again, these are part of the tactics to try to deter people from marching.
Indeed.
They won't work. You know, this is an extraordinary thing that's going on at the moment in response to, as I say, something that's unique in human history, a live-streamed genocide.
Indeed. I want to just bring in Jonathan, because we've got very little time, and I just wanted to know, because I kind of cut in there, I just wanted to know if you had anything more to say about that particular issue as well, Jonathan.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Is there anything else that you wanted to come back to? Because I think I cut you off in relation to that particular issue of the marches being effectively subverted.
Yes, well, I think, as I said it before, but it can't be said too often, there are very large numbers of Jews who are critical of Israel, some of whom are Zionist, but find what happens in what Israel is doing is outrageous, some who are becoming increasingly anti-Zionist, and we are being used as if all Jews are threatened and all Jews are on one side. This is a horrendous activity, the slaughter that's going on. It's not surprising that many Jews are sensitive to these issues and are absolutely horrified that the state, which claims to be speaking for us but doesn't, is nevertheless using us as an argument of why pro-Palestinian marches should not take place. We are outraged,
Jonathan,
and we need to say so.
We have unfortunately run out of time, but Ben and Professor Jonathan, it has been an absolute pleasure because we've needed to get some information. We need to know what's happening, and you've given that to us. Thank you so much, and thank you to the viewers for joining us. We will be back again.